Welcome to the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska Soybean Farmers and their checkoff. I'm Susan Littlefield. It has definitely been a roller coaster type of week once again in this grain complex. A lot of outside market influences weighing in, a lot of inside influence as well. Whether we're just talking about how the grains have moved, what the weather has been doing, what we're going to see moving forward with opportunities to market. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, kind of getting a feel for what's going on in this corn and bean market and where we see ourselves moving forward. Stick around, a lot to look at as we get ready for this weekend's edition.
Meet the champions of innovation in the heart of Nebraska. They're not just farmers, and they nurture more than just crops, pushing boundaries and turning challenges into opportunities. They trade knowledge and know-how, and their dedication doesn't end at harvest. It's in your every bite and every drive. The future of food, fuel, and fiber, and the future of Nebraska starts right here.
And welcome back once again. Seeing join me, Jeff Peterson. Jeff is with Heartland Farm Partners. And Jeff, as we kind of take a look at this market, I made a comment during the open just about the kind of roller coaster feel these markets seem to have, especially when you looked at a Friday trade where there was optimism for higher corn numbers. What do you see as a current situation right now for both corn and soybeans?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It has really been a roller coaster ride, and boy, it's been emotional. As we dig in and look at it, the current situation overall, what we've got is, the funds, and that's where we'll start. They're sitting there on, coming off the CFTC report, the COT report from this past week. They were sitting there at a record short on both the corn and the soybean side. And then you dig in a little bit deeper and you look at the crop and you say, okay, well, how's this crop doing? And overall, it's doing really well. We're sitting at 68% good to excellent on both the corn and the soybean side. That's above average for both of those. And ultimately, we've had a little bit of improvement. Now, as we go into this next week, it's probably a coin toss. We could be one higher, one lower. The thing we know this time of year is it's really hard to maintain basically whatever rating we're at, because we're moving from the point on the corn side where we physically are tasseling, coming off a vegetative state, getting the tassels out. And then when we do that, the crop has a natural tendency to start losing some of its color and some of its basically good to excellent rating. And we know that's a little bit subjective. But as we dig in a little bit deeper, a couple of things we've been watching really close is, how's the percent silking going on the pollination side? And what we've seen from this past week, sitting there at 41% silked. Now we think by the time we get into probably this next Monday, I think this crop will be over 50%. As a matter of fact, it could be up there to 58% silked. And as we compare that to last year and also the 5-year average, all your major grain producing states are actually above the 5-year and also above last year, except for North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota, which we'd expect. They had some challenges getting that crop in. And then we look over on the soybean side and we say, okay, so how's the blooming going? Blooms are set at 51%. That's just fine for this time of year. And we know that we'll be seeing some pod fill happen. So, overall, the market's now looking ahead and saying, all right, pollination looks good, blooms looking good. Then it looks ahead and says, okay, how's the current weather forecast look? And honestly, right now with these cool conditions, pollination's going on very well. And at a certain point in here, we would like to see a little bit warmer, because we know our GDUs, we're going to need that as we start filling these ears out. But the other side of that also gets to be the forecast we have, at least here in the U.S., going ahead of us, really looks pretty good, Susan.
Man, you want to talk about a perfect recipe for this crop at pollination time. And I think some optimism as well for the soybean side of it moving into the month of August.
Oh, most definitely. These conditions are excellent for that. And the soybeans, the soybeans really like these type of temperatures. Maybe you could boost them up a little bit, but give them a little shot of moisture here. Now, what we're going to have to watch, though, is as we get in towards the tail end of July and those first few weeks of August, there are some forecasts out there that definitely does start heating things back up again. And depending on which particular, forecast you look at, could bring in some dry conditions. But the fact remains, I still think there's storms, because we've got that ridge that's setting up in the southwest. It's not giving us really hot conditions, it's giving us warmer conditions. But by it setting up in the southwest and where it's ultimately allowing some of those storms to come over the top and actually give us some pretty good rain chances out there as we go forward, is how I think it will play out. That's not necessarily how it's forecasted.
So what are your thoughts as you look at this market, kind of what the feels are about this week's trade for corn and beans?
Overall, actually, Susan, we know that corn and beans, as we look at it, had a lower week overall. But I do feel really pretty good about this corn market and also for the bean market. As I dig into that corn market first, September trade and December trade, very, very similar. What we've actually seen is that going back to July 8th, when we saw Hurricane Beryl make landfall, then we saw some moisture going up across Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. That caused that market to take one more surge back, but we've been able to hold those lows. And ultimately for the September corn, that would be right in and around that 390 area. And really over the last 9 trading sessions, we've just been chopping sideways in here. And that's been a really good thing, because if you think about prior to that, we really had this market was just on a downfall. And we've seen that same type of price action out in December, which has been very positive also. Different prices ranges though, as we look at the December corn, we know that we've really got that support coming in really right in that 403 area with some resistance up there in the 412 area. So, a little bit higher than what we've seen on the September corn. Over on the beans, a little bit different story on the beans, but I think this week's trade really was pretty constructive on the bean side. What we ended up seeing on the August soybeans actually are trying to go ahead and develop a slide uptrend. We kind of had a double bottom in there on the 15th and 16th of this week, and then we've kind of been working our way up. Not necessarily seeing that on the November soybeans, though. November's still got a slight downtrend. We had kind of a spike low that happened yesterday. The market tried to recover back today, but overall we're still seeing this market dip lower. But I think the thing that gives me more optimism, though, as we go one level deeper, we get back into soybean oil, we take a look at soybean meal, we're starting to see those markets firm up. Oil's trying to work its way back up. Meal is actually in the process of working its way out of a downtrend that it's been in. And those two, with the soybean oil lower and meal lower, that's really put a lot of pressure on soybeans, Susan.
So then, being an optimist, can we say lows maybe in place for these grains? Let's give them something to look at positive going into next week.
You bet. So as we dig in and we look at the fundamentals, okay, we always go back to those stocks to use numbers. And when we dig into those stocks to use numbers on the corn side, it would suggest that yes, we have or in the process of finding a low in here, but I got to put a big but on that, Susan. And the big but is unless the yields do creep higher from here. And that is possible. And if that does happen, then we could pull it back slightly. Might be a little bit too early to say on soybeans, though, because here's what I'm concerned about on beans. Even though I'm optimistic here on beans that we've kind of turned this market, getting a little bit of a bounce, if we would have really good conditions going forward, and it's too early to say here on these yields, I think we could have a yield on the soybeans that's higher than where we're at right now.
You kind of alluded sides of that crop. I think even though we've got a lot of areas that were damaged, there's still a lot of areas that look absolutely amazing for, as you and I are talking, the 19th of July.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. And we're going to have to look at that. And I really feel, don't get me wrong, I feel for anybody who's been in an area where they've caught wind, they've caught hail. That's very devastating. And obviously that did hurt the overall crop. But the thing that we're looking at overall is a lot of these other areas are still having some really good conditions. And as we dig in and say, okay, so what is this market factoring in? Right now, if you really look at it, the current WASDE report from July would have said that the crop was about 15.1 billion bushels. I think right now the market's really kind of factoring in about a 14.85 billion bushel crop. And what that means is as we get into August, and there's going to be a lot more attention, especially as we go into the August crop report, talking about, acres and talking about yield. And the first thing we'll talk about is those planted acres. Planted acres are at 91.5 million. I do think those probably come down about 1 million acres. Earlier, we were thinking maybe they'd come down a little more than that, but if you bring those back down 1 million, then you have to adjust the planted to harvested percentage, currently sitting at 91.2% planted to harvest. And then you probably bring that down to about a 90.7. And as you bring all those things together, Susan, what that would probably suggest is that we've got a yield, dialed in somewhere around probably that 181, 181.5 type area, which I think is still fair at that point. That would be a new record. We know last year was at 177.3. And then on the bean side, I think it's a little too early to really dig too deep into that. We know that the current yield there is at 52. I think we'll probably see a few more acres added to that just because of the switch from corn and beans. But we'll get a chance to see that in the August WASDE report.
There's always that human factor, Jeff, that's kind of factored into these grains as well. And how is the stress? What are you hearing as you talk to your customers and just folks in general when we look at the lower numbers we've seen in corn and beans?
Oh, they're extremely stressed right now. I think the thing that we have to look at on that is that say, okay, so how do we handle that stress? And basically it's the fear of the unknown, right? It's the fear of the unknown looking forward and saying, where's this market going to go? It's the fear of what did I miss out on and why didn't I sell when prices are higher? So I think the best thing that we could do to kind of help ourselves is that when we're in a fear situation, we're in basically, if you think about it, it's a fight or flight mentality. And that makes it very emotional, makes it so that we're really a lot of times not able to think clearly. So the first thing we need to do is dig in, bring all our costs together, understand what we've got in a per acre cost of production number, and then start running some basically different yields. What do we have for a high yield, medium yield, low yield? See where our break evens are. Take what we think is our most likely outcome for yield at this point. And I realize that's going to change. And then figure those numbers in and see where we come out at. And then if it looks like we're going to have some carryover debt, start thinking about how we're going to deal with that. And I think if we can do that and start thinking about that, it'll actually make us feel a lot better.
And finally, as we wrap this up, unsold corn and beans, we know that there's still a lot of stuff sitting in the bins out there.
Yeah, exactly. What I would do on that is there's some good basis levels out there. I would continue to physically move bushels, put them on basis contract. We know depending on what the month they're priced off of, we're going to have either till, the end of August here or the end of September. I would continue to get those moved on that. And then on any little bounce, we'll be able to physically focus on, getting those bushels sold, Susan.
All right. Well, Jeff, thanks for joining us this week.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. I enjoy it.
All right. Thanks so much. Jeff Peterson joining us this week with Heartland Farm Partners. Quick reminder, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's been this week's Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup.